Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Viewers, Pakistan is facing the most critical situation with reference to Taliban's. In its history, in 66 years, this country has been affected badly by this curse of terrorism. Terrorism in this country has crippled everything, its economy and international dignity as well. For the world, Pakistan is the state where terrorists are produced. If we analyze it on a larger scale, war on terror initiated by US on Afghanistan, then Iraq and other Muslim countries, drone attacks and of course the incident of 9/11. All these factors collectively pushed Pakistan into this mess, where even we aren't fighting for our own benefits, but we are in a war which is being imposed on us. What we need to understand here is that who are these Talibans and what difference lies between Afghan Talibans and Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Are they different entities or they are performing these terrorist activities for their mutual interest? What will be the consequences and what should be Pakistan's line of action regarding evacuation, and what amendments should be made on priority regarding Pak-Afghan relations? These are the issues which we are going to talk about in our show today, and for all these issues that we would like to get the analysis, I have Mr. Zaid Hamid joining me in the show. Assalamu alaikum and thank you for joining us. Zaid Hamid Sab, you must have seen the topic that we would be talking today is about Talibans. I would like to know that your personal experience on which you have written this book as well, which is From Indus to Oxus. And in this book, you're talking about your experiences of almost 6 years in Afghanistan. And you were on grounds there, fighting with, when the revolution and the Soviets were withdrawing from there, you went through all those experiences while staying in Afghanistan. So tell me the origination of Talibans. Who are these Talibans? Did they start first in Afghanistan and then filtered into Pakistan? Tell me the history of them first.
You see, let me give you a brief background first, because Afghanistan right now is in the focus of the entire world. The Americans plan to evacuate next year. The entire NATO is present in Afghanistan. And the perception that has been created is that Afghanistan is the epicenter of terror. That is the reason why after 9/11, Americans went into Afghanistan first. And now, because of the Afghan war, the perception is being built that it's the Pakistan which is the epicenter of terror, which is exporting terrorism globally. The fact of the matter is that Pakistan is an absolute victim in this entire war that is going on in this region. In 1979, Pakistan did not invite the Soviets into Afghanistan. It was the Soviet invasion into Afghanistan that triggered a war of resistance. And
within Afghanistan. Every Afghan ethnic community, whether it was Pashtun or Tajik or Uzbek or Hazaras, they picked up arms. Afghans by nature, by history, by tradition are a martial nation. They're a martial race. Everybody had weapons, and whatever weapons they had, of course, there were no comparison to the Soviet weapons, but still a war of resistance began. Refugees started to flock into Pakistan, almost 4 million of them at that time. That is, we're talking about 79 and the early 80s. Almost after a year or so, it's the Western world and the Americans started to join the war of resistance, supplying the resistance with weapons and equipment, because initially Afghanistan was actually written off, because Soviet Union has never withdrawn from a country in which they had entered. Czechoslovakia, Poland, all Eastern Europe, Central Asia. The experience of Soviet Union was if they enter into a land, they never evacuate, they never leave. So Afghanistan was also considered a lost case, but it was the resistance of the Afghan nation which convinced the world that a war can be fought in Afghanistan. So Pakistan became the frontline ally, frontline state. We became the backers, sponsors, supporters of the Afghan resistance. And these people who were resisting Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, they are called Mujahideen.
They were at that time called the Mujahideen.
Okay.
And Ronald Reagan actually compared these Mujahideen with the founding fathers of United States. And Mujahideen were the heroes of the world. They were the defenders of the free world.
At that time?
At that time.
Okay.
That's how they were being presented. And I was part of the Afghan resistance. That's why the book that you refer to, these are my personal memoirs. the first ever written by any resistance fighter in Afghanistan. So whatever I speak is through a first-hand experience. So when I tell you that Afghan Mujahideen were genuine Afghan people who were only trying to liberate their land. But after 1988, when Soviet Union withdrew, and Americans also left the place, assuming their grand strategic objective of defeating the Soviet Union was achieved. But Americans never wanted a Mujahideen government in Kabul. So after the Geneva Accord, and you would remember the Geneva Accord, an accord which guaranteed Soviet exit from Afghanistan, but that did not include Afghan resistance as a party to the conflict. And that's how the seeds of the present conflict were actually sown at that moment when Geneva Accord was signed between Pakistan and Kabul, as Soviet Union and Americans acting as guarantors, but Afghan resistance was kept out of it. As a result, when Soviet Union left, Afghanistan went into a state of civil war. Initially for 3 years, when Najibullah communist government was in Kabul, and when Najibullah government was overrun by Ahmad Shah Massoud from north, he was a Tajik military commander, when he captured Kabul from the north.
Now let me ask you this here. So there were two groups, as much as I have read this book.
There were actually
Shah
six
Massoud
groups.
and Hikmat Yar.
There were six large groups,
ones.
the six-party alliance. They were based in Peshawar, and the six parties, out of them 5 were Pashtun parties, and only one belonged to Ustad Burhanuddin Rabbani, from whom Massoud also belongs to, was a Tajik party, Tajik group. And the two charismatic commanders which emerged out of the Afghan resistance was, one was Gulbuddin Hikmat Yar, and another was Ahmad Shah Massoud. Ahmad Shah Massoud was a Tajik, and Hikmat Yar was Pashtun. And in 1992, when...
So in this civil war of Afghanistan, these two groups, Hikmat Yar and Ahmad Shah Massoud, they came head-to-head with each other.
You see,
against the communists.
Initially, as long as the Soviets were present in Afghanistan, all the groups were together somehow. They were kind of loose alliance, and they were all fighting against the Soviets. When the Soviets withdrew, still the communist government was in Kabul, so still the six-party Mujahideen resistance alliance stayed together. They fought against the communist regime, trying to overthrow it. But once the Kabul regime was overthrown, then the battle for power began. There was a power struggle in Kabul, and that was between all these Mujahideen groups. They fought amongst each other. Hikmat Yar fighting Ahmad Shah Massoud. And it was that civil war that created a complete meltdown of law and order and created a complete anarchy in Afghanistan, because Americans had left, Soviets had left, the central government of Najibullah had collapsed, Pakistan, General Ziaul Haq had been killed in an air crash before, and a political government was in Pakistan which was completely naive to the Afghan conflict. Nobody bothered to clear the mess which was created after the Soviet withdrawal. So as a result, Pakistan had no Afghan policy. After the Soviet withdrawal, Pakistan had actually abandoned the Afghan resistance, and the political governments of Nawaz Sharif and Benazir kept changing hands in Islamabad, and nobody knew what's happening in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan actually, that period, in the early 90s, was a complete chaos. Warlords, brigands, kidnappers, different ethnic, linguistic, sectarian gangs fighting amongst each other. It was this chaos that created Taliban as a resistance group from the south of the country, from Kandahar, from south of, that's the Pashtun-dominated area. Taliban actually mean the students. These people were actually the young resistance fighters who had fought against the Soviets in the earlier times, under the umbrella, under the shadow of the larger six-party alliance. But since the six-party elders were fighting now amongst each other, these young students got frustrated, very angry. And they formed an alliance, they formed a group called Taliban, meaning the students. And the students got together. First they captured south of Afghanistan, Kandahar, and then they started to move northward. And the people were so upset, the local population was so angry with the existing warlords and commanders that wherever Taliban went, they were actually welcomed. Taliban did not have to fight any major battle in Afghanistan until they reached the gates of Kabul, because the local population started supporting them, because wherever Taliban went, they brought in peace, they brought in justice. And they are ordinary Pashtuns. They were ordinary local Afghan shepherds, farmers, students, the people who were, the youngsters whose elders were actually leading the war against the Soviets, but now fighting amongst each other. So the misconception is that Pakistan created Taliban. That's the biggest misconception of the Afghan resistance. For the simple reason is
so
that
Taliban is the creation of Afghanistan itself.
Of an internal chaos of Afghanistan. They were created out of the circumstances. Pakistan was investing on Gulbuddin Hikmat Yar. Pakistan was investing on the Pashtun segments which were already in Afghanistan, which Pakistan had been supporting for the last 20 years. So why would Pakistan destroy all its assets in Afghanistan and create a new group which was totally out of control, which was totally so ruthlessly and fiercely independent that nobody could actually control them? So when Taliban reached at the gates of Kabul, they fought against everybody. They destroyed Hikmatyar, they destroyed Ahmad Shah Massoud, they destroyed the Six-Party Alliance, they destroyed sectarian, other ethnic groups, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras, and Taliban finally captured Kabul around 1996. And only when the Kabul was fallen, Kabul fell to the Afghan Taliban, then the world community actually started to take them seriously. Saudi Arabia recognized them, Pakistan recognized them. The world community did not recognize them because they considered them a very harsh regime. But the fact of the matter is that Afghan society was harsh. It is a harsh society anyway.
They have been through so many invasions.
So much of war, so much of invasions. There are martial nations. And
so the Talibans were there from 1996 to 2001.
2001, that was the period when Taliban were actually ruling Afghanistan. But one thing that must be very clearly understood is that Pakistan, for Pakistan's point of view, for the point of view of the region, that was the most stable period of Afghan history in the recent history of Afghan war. Taliban destroyed and eliminated all insurgencies and terrorism coming out of Afghanistan. Pakistan had no suicide bombing during that time. Pakistan had no border dispute with Afghanistan. Pakistan has no Balochistan Liberation Army at that time. No violence, insurgency in Karachi. No terrorism or suicide bombing ever took place in Pakistan while Afghan Taliban were ruling Kabul.
From 96 to 2001?
From 96 to 2001. Afghan Taliban destroyed poppy, drugs. This is on statistics on record that while for the first time in history, Afghanistan actually became drug-free when Afghan Taliban were in Afghanistan.
But then what about the way they ruled the country? They did not allow women to go to school. What about all that aspect?
You see, none of you has ever seen Afghan television or Afghan radio, or none of you has ever actually been to Afghanistan during that time while the Afghan Taliban were actually ruling there. So all what you hear is disinformation, propaganda, weapons of mass destructions of Iraq.
So all that is not true, that Talibans, when they were in Afghanistan, they did not abandon women to go out to get education. All that is not true? That's what you're saying?
This is exactly what I'm saying. Taliban were very fierce Pashtun tribals. And in the Afghan Pashtun society, mixing of genders is not allowed. Even in Pakistani tribal areas, the mixing of men and women is not allowed. Taliban were never against the education of women. They were against the co-education of men and women. And
but didn't they not allow women to go to the just one gender institutes as well?
See, that's what I'm telling you. That is the culture of Afghanistan. That is the culture of Pashtuns. That is the culture of all almost conservative Muslim societies. But the point what I'm trying to tell you is, even if Taliban were doing this, that's not terrorism. That's not destroying the world. That's not a reason why they should be bombed. That's not what the point I'm trying to make to you is that is not the reason why the Americans went into Afghanistan. That is not the reason why Pakistan is being destroyed today. We have to understand the real issues, even if they were harsh on women. This is something that is common in all tribal societies. In Saudi Arabia, they don't allow women to drive. What Taliban were doing is exactly same what Saudis do to their women in Saudi Arabia. But you never heard Americans raising their voices. Do women drive in Saudi Arabia? No. Are women allowed to take part in politics and media or anything? No. Are women allowed to study together with men in Saudi Arabia? No. Whatever Taliban was doing is actually Saudi Arabia is doing the same thing. So why blame Taliban for that? Again, I'm saying that's part of the tribal culture. Saudis are also tribal. Taliban were also tribal. It's part of the tribal culture. But we are talking about terrorism. We are talking about the fact that where did Taliban came from? Pakistan did not create them. They were created out of the circumstances in the post-Soviet withdrawal chaos when the world community abandoned Afghanistan. Nobody wanted to clear the mess of the Soviet war. For 10 years, 1.5 million Afghans died. 4 million of them were refugees in Pakistan. Almost 2 million were refugees in Iran. But nobody took responsibility for sending them back, for controlling the warlords, for controlling the parties, bringing in Afghan government represented by the Afghan resistance. Even they were isolated and abandoned in the Geneva Accord. So whatever is happening in Afghanistan, the world community is equally responsible. But Taliban brought some sanity into their already madhouse society, which was post-war society. So then
9/11 happens.
Then 9/11 happens. And we know it for fact that Taliban were not destroyed because of their ideology, because of their belief. War on terror was only an excuse. Taliban were destroyed because they had refused to give a gas pipeline contract to Unicol, an American gas pipeline company from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan to Pakistan to India. That was the TTP gas pipeline which Taliban refused to sign the contract for Unicol and signed it with Bridas, an Argentinian company. And the presentation of Unicol is available on record, giving it to the US Congress, saying that now we need a regime change in Afghanistan because the existing Taliban regime has refused contract to the North American oil and gas companies. So this was the reason, that the same reason why the war in Syria is going on today was exactly the reason. And Hamid Karzai, incidentally, was also a consultant to Unicol. And once the regime change took place, Mr. Consultant became Mr. Mayor of Kabul.
Zaid, Hamid Sahab, I have to take a break here, and after the break we will continue our discussion. Viewers, stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back, viewers. We're talking about the origination of Taliban and then how did Pakistan ended up with Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and so many other organizations. Zaid, Hamid Sahab, you have just explained the history of Taliban, that how Taliban, they got into place in Afghanistan due to their own internal crisis. Now, how did Pakistan got the baggage of Taliban? Why are we hearing Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan here?
I would like to really clarify this important point because there's lots of confusion on this. Afghan Taliban, as we have explained, are the children of the Afghan Mujahideen. They are Pashtuns, they are local Afghans, they are freedom fighters, they are fighting to liberate their land. Ideologically, they may be harsh because of their tribal customs, but they are Muslims. They are part of the mainstream Muslim community, and they are not terrorists. They don't have any expansionist agenda. Between 1996 and 2001, when they were ruling Afghanistan, they were nationalist local rulers. They were not exporting terrorism or war, or they had not waged a war against Pakistan, they did not wage a war against Iran, they did not wage a war against Central Asia. They were very nationalist local rulers who were only Afghans, wanted to run their own country in whichever way they wanted. And the reason they were invaded was because they were too difficult to handle for the Western oil and gas companies. The corporate interests actually got them removed. Mr. Karzai became the president of Afghanistan because he was also the advisor of Unicol, the gas company which Taliban had refused to give the TTP gas line contract.
So you think the 9/11 incident, is it been planned after the refusal on this gas pipeline agreement from Afghanistan Taliban?
See, 9/11 incident, when we were doing the last program with you, we also said that it is end of the 20th century. A project for New American Century was designed, in which it was mentioned that America would need a Pearl Harbor to wage a global war. So wars were planned anyway. Even if they had not invaded Afghanistan, they would have invaded Iraq later and Syria and Libya. Wars were defined already, they were planned. Afghanistan was taken up as a first target because that was critical to be in Afghanistan, because by being in Afghanistan, you actually come in the soft belly of Pakistan and Iran. And this brings us to the second part of your question, who are Pakistani Taliban?
Exactly.
See, Pakistani Taliban are radically different from Afghan Taliban, both ideologically and administratively. Ideologically, Pakistani Taliban belong to a heretic sect called Khawarij or Takfiri in Islam, which believes in waging war against the Muslim societies, which believes in destroying Muslim communities only on the basis of difference of opinion. Afghan Taliban are not like that. Pakistani Taliban are. So ideologically, in the mainstream Muslim thought process, the Pakistani Taliban are considered heretics. They are a sect which is a violent sect, and the whole world actually projects Pakistani Taliban, which are exactly of the same mentality as Ayman al-Zawahiri or all these so-called Al-Qaeda, which the world sees them as Al-Qaeda, are actually belonging to a heretic sect. They do not represent the mainstream Islam at all. In fact, these sect, the so-called Pakistani Taliban and the Takfiri and Kharji sect, actually wage a war against the Muslim societies, not against the West, not against non-Muslims, to be honest. And the Muslim societies have suffered most at their hands. So Pakistan suffered from this ideology which was created after the Afghan Taliban were removed from Afghanistan. How come? Once you have a group, a sect, which have a anarchic, radical, heretic ideology, it becomes easier for hostile foreign countries to use this group to wage war against Muslim nations. And this is exactly what happened with TTP. TTP are based in Afghanistan. They are supported by CIA and Indian RAW. They are funded, equipment, logistics, weapons, supplies, ammunition, training camps, medical facilities. Everything is based in Afghanistan under NATO and American and CIA protection. And TTP does not wage war against the American occupation in Afghanistan. Unlike Afghan Taliban, who are waging a war against the occupation forces, and Afghan Taliban are not waging a war against Pakistan. On the other hand, TTP is waging a war against Pakistani state. 100,000 Pakistanis have been killed and wounded in the last 7 years.
Right.
And not a single American has been killed by TTP because they are protected, backed, supported by CIA, just as the Free Syrian Army is now being protected, sponsored, equipped, weapons supplied by CIA in Syria. Free Syrian Army is an identical copy of TTP. You see the videos of TTP and you see the videos of Free Syrian Army beheading the soldiers, butchering, killing women and children, suicide bombings, identical scenarios, identical operations, identical handlers, identical ideology. So basically what we are telling you is that CIA and RAW used the environment of Afghanistan. They wanted to destabilize Pakistan also. Obama's doctrine of AFPAC is now about 7 years old. AFPAC means that Pakistan will also be a battlefield just like Afghanistan is. Pakistan would not be treated as an ally. That's why you find CIA waging a drone war inside Pakistan. That's why you find CIA sending in Balochistan Liberation Army terrorists in Balochistan. That's why you find CIA sending in Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the insurgents, the religious fanatics, who are waging a war against the very state of Pakistan.
So the stand of these Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, that if drones can be stopped, then we won't be doing any terrorist activities. What is all that?
This is farcical. This is completely farce. This is only propaganda stunt. The handlers of TTP and drones are both CIA. The handlers of TTP are also CIA and RAW, the Indian Intelligence Secret Service. So this is only a propaganda bluff. What happens is, within TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, so many times peace initiatives were taken with them, trying to break off their separate commanders, trying to convince them to have peace deals with Pakistan. But whenever Pakistan would sign a peace deal with one of the TTP commander, a CIA drone would eliminate him. And then the rest of the TTP would start waging their war against the Pakistani state. You see, TTP, a mercenary army, they are not independent to decide peace deals with Pakistan. Whenever some of them try to fall out of line and try to cut a peace deal with Pakistan, they always eliminate. 4 or 5 top TTP commanders who tried to cut peace deals with Pakistan have been eliminated by CIA drones. And
so you think
so
this
that's
is
how
what's
CIA
happening,
keeps them in line.
So you think this is what's happening now recently, if we come to the recent time, what's happening in Pakistan, that whenever we initiate a peace talks with Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, something happens. And this time, when the government did initiate the peace talks, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan attacked in Upper Dir, our GOC. Major General Sanaullah Saab.
Major General GOC Sawat was killed.
So this time there is no drone attack. This time it's TTP itself attacking our Pak army officers.
You see, this is what happens. You see, for giving you an example of Maulvi Nazir, he was one of the TTP commander who was trying to cut peace deals with Pakistan. First, CIA sent a drone after him. The drone missed, and he survived. So the TTP was ordered to send a suicide bomber, and the next strike, a suicide bomber killed him. You see, so basically CIA either acts through drones or they act through the TTP suicide bombers. They act in continue waging the war against the state of Pakistan. Why? Why would CIA do that? Why would CIA want to wage a war against the state of Pakistan? This is a very pertinent question now.
Right. Why are they trying to destabilize Pakistan?
See,
because we are a nuclear power?
Exactly. See, the point is, the grand strategic objective of the US foreign policy that we had discussed, the first and the foremost was the defense and security of Israel, and that means no Muslim country would be allowed to keep nuclear weapons. Pakistan is the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons. So the only reason the world can create a global environment that Pakistan's nuclear weapons must be taken away is to give a perception that Pakistan is a failed and a failing state. Pakistan is a dysfunctional state. Pakistan is about to be overrun by terrorists. Pakistan's nuclear weapons would go into the hands of the terrorists, and that is why the UN Security Council must be moved and Pakistan must be forced to hand over its nuclear weapons to international Agency of Atomic, IAEA, or UN weapons inspectors. So this is the environment that is being created, that needs to be created.
Then what should we do now that we understand that, okay, these are the major objectives and these are the forces that are working to create this, to achieve this goal to disarm Pakistan being a nuclear country? Then what should our country do? What should our political leadership do? What should our army do? How can they fight back and, stand up against this motive?
It's very simple. The fact is, all you need is a strong leadership in Islamabad. Musharraf had completely collapsed in front of the Americans in the post 9/11 scenario. Zardari was completely right off. He was completely spineless, corrupt, the man was brought in actually after a deal. All his corruption cases were written off, and he was brought there, maintained, so that he could follow what the US and CIA keeps telling him. And now the Nawaz Sharif government, they also don't have any backbone to make a stand against the Americans or the IMF or the World Bank. Different levers are used to bring them in line, keep them in line. It's very simple. The Americans are stuck in Afghanistan. After 10 years of war, Afghan Taliban have actually broken their back, defeated them. The US economy, the term that the American media is using nowadays, that Obama government actually does not have any more money to even pay to their soldiers, pay for the health care, pay for the development expenditures, because their loans that they have taken, the ceiling of those loans have already almost arrived. It was already there in January. The Congress Senate raised the ceiling, they had few months breather, and now again in October. So American economy has been destroyed at home. They have been defeated in the battlefield. And the American army right now and UN and the NATO are stuck in Afghanistan. They need Pakistan to come out. If Pakistan closes the passage, if Pakistan closes the ground routes, and if Pakistan closes the airways, the Americans and the NATO would die like rats in Afghanistan. They need Pakistan to get out. And this is where a strong Pakistani government can use this advantage of geography as a strategic advantage, strategic weapon. Secondly, Pakistan must start engaging and negotiating with the Afghan Taliban, with whom the Americans are also talking. Right now, Pakistan is making the same mistake which we did in 1988. We talked to the Kabul regime, which was a puppet regime. Pakistan talked to the Americans and the Russians, but ignored the actual party of the conflict, the Afghan resistance. As a result, for next 25 years, till today, Afghanistan is under a state of war. The mistake of 1988 has led to a quarter-century war in Afghanistan. Now Pakistan must not make that mistake. Pakistan should and must talk to Afghan Taliban, the real party of conflict.
So you said that Pakistan made a mistake in 1988 of not talking to Abdul Shah Massoud.
Not talking to Afghan resistance and keeping them out. And within that also, when Pakistan actually talked, Pakistan only talked to the Pashtun elements and abandoned the Tajiks, Uzbeks and Hazaras. That was the second blunder that Pakistan did.
So today, if they need to talk to Afghan Talibans, then which one is the major group that they should be talking to?
You see, Afghan Taliban is only one group. That is Mullah Umar group. I mean, all other groups are actually, they work under Mullah Umar. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar's group is another group which is there. And of course, but that right now is a very small group. Mullah Umar's group is a stronger one and a bigger one. But Pakistan must not make that mistake of 1988. This time, Pakistan also must talk to Tajiks, Uzbeks and Hazaras. Because you see, one thing that we have seen, it was the civil war in Afghanistan, the war between Pashtuns and Tajiks and Uzbeks and Hazaras, that actually allowed the Americans to ride on the fears of Tajiks, Uzbeks and Hazaras, create a northern alliance and use the northern alliance to come into Afghanistan. If there was peace in Afghanistan after the Soviet withdrawal, if all Afghan ethnic communities had lived in peace and a broad-based government had formed in Afghanistan, Americans would never have entered Afghanistan. They could never.
Okay, so I have a question here that you said that Pakistan needs to talk to Afghan Talibans.
As well as Uzbeks, Tajiks and Hazaras.
They can talk to the Taliban in Pakistan. But then at the same time, you said that CIA is controlling this TTP. So if CIA is controlling the TTP, then what difference would it make if we talk to Afghan Taliban?
You see, if the Americans leave Afghanistan, the CIA would leave as well. See, this is the point. Pakistan need to talk to Afghan Taliban for a future power structure in Afghanistan which is broad-based, which is peaceful, which is pro-Pakistan. And once Americans leave, Afghan Taliban and Afghans will guarantee that Afghan soil will not be used against Pakistan. And TTP, as we said, our mercenary army, if their training areas are lost, if their weapons are lost, if their supply line is lost, if their money supply is lost, they cannot survive a day. They survive because when Pakistan army defeats them, they fall back into Afghanistan.
I have to take a break here, Zaid Hamid Saab, and after the break we will continue. According to Zaid Hamid, he's saying that if we need peace in Pakistan, then we need to talk to Afghan Taliban. A strong Afghanistan will guarantee a peaceful Pakistan as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back, viewers. We are talking about the presence of Taliban in Pakistan and the stage of terrorism that is created by their presence. We are also trying to analyze how can we get rid of these Taliban from Pakistan. Will talking to Afghan Taliban help us in evacuating the Taliban from Pakistan? Will talking to TTP in Pakistan be the right way to go? Zaid Hamid Saab, before the break, you said that talking to Afghan Taliban would be the right direction to proceed to get the Taliban, out of Pakistan. And Afghan Taliban's hold on Pakistani Taliban depends on the evacuation of US from Afghanistan. So you think that US will leave Afghanistan?
You see, let me clarify. Pakistani Taliban are a proxy mercenary group. Afghan Taliban are a national resistance army. They're very strong, very powerful, and they represent the Afghan society. And if Afghan Taliban decide that they will eliminate the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, TTP cannot resist them. From one side, Pakistan army is pushing them into Afghanistan, and in Afghanistan they can easily be eliminated by Afghan resistance. So, but keep one thing in mind, as long as there is even a single soldier of foreign occupation forces in Afghanistan, the war of resistance will continue in Afghanistan. So if we want peace in Afghanistan, we must make sure all foreign forces leave Afghanistan. And that should be the first priority of Pakistan, because what we are hearing is that while on one hand Americans are saying that they may have partial withdrawal by 2014, but on the other hand, the American presence may be over 100,000 troops, still 25,000 regular, plus about 100,000 contractors. Contractor means Blackwaters, XC, mercenary armies, foreign, the armies which are basically ruthless but do not fall under any Geneva Convention. It's now CIA's latest strategy is not to deploy armies which are under the Geneva Convention, which fall under the audit and scrutiny also, but use private security contractors, which are ruthless and they are completely out of any legislation, out of any scrutiny. So now what the Americans plan is, they want to leave a very sizable presence of Blackwaters foreign contractors into Afghanistan. But if that happens, the war will continue to flow into Pakistan, because the CIA would remain with the foreign contractors. Indian RAW would keep on operating, TTP will continue to get the supplies of weapons, and Pakistan would continue to be destabilized, and the global propaganda would actually be ignited that Pakistan is a failing dysfunctional state. Only till 2014, when the Americans plan to take out the bulk of their hardware, they need Pakistan. Once they take the bulk of their hardware out, they will not need Pakistan. Then Pakistan is very clear assessment that then they will impose sanctions on Pakistan, then they will start to squeeze Pakistan economically, militarily and diplomatically. This is exactly what the Americans did in 1990 when they did not need Pakistan and Afghanistan. When Soviets withdrew, they imposed sanctions on Pakistan, because again on the same pretext that Pakistan is developing nuclear weapons. And we know that now. It's a deja vu for us. After 20 years, after 25 years, exactly we have reached the same spot. First the Soviets are withdrawing, now the Americans are withdrawing. But once they withdraw, there would be sanctions on Pakistan.
So you think we would be able to survive those sanctions then?
See, this is where the strength of our diplomacy and leadership is. We can force the Americans, really, to come to our terms. We have the potential, we have the experience, we have the resources, we have the manpower, we have the contacts in Afghanistan. We destroyed Soviet Union, and we can destroy the Americans also, and Americans know that. When we blocked their supply line for 8 months, they could not do a thing to Pakistan. They had to come down to our terms. They bought off our leadership, but they could not fight it out with us. American economy at home is destroyed, and this is something that Pakistan has to do. If we can have a favorable Afghan solution in Afghanistan, which means bringing a broad-based government in Kabul, evacuating and throwing out all foreign forces from Afghanistan, and destroying the insurgency of TTP. If this can be achieved, then no amount of sanctions can harm us, can damage us. But if the war in Afghanistan continue to affect Pakistan, insurgency, rebellion, terrorism, suicide bombings continue to flow into Pakistan, then all kind of sanctions, all kind of diplomatic pressure is going to hurt us. So it's in a critical interest to have an Afghanistan of our choice. We can join hands with Iran, we can join hands with Turkey, we can join hands with Russia and China to bring a regional solution to Afghanistan. Foreign forces, extra-regional forces are not needed in Afghanistan. This is what Pakistan must make sure. We made a mistake in '88, this mistake must not be repeated. And this is probably going to be the policy of Pakistan. But this government is too weak. It's too weak.
So you think in the recent APC, the 7th declaration that we saw, and they did mention one of the aspects in that declaration is that Pakistan will support for a strong Afghanistan, and any cooperation that would be needed, Pakistan will support that. So you think this is the right direction of this government?
You see, what is happening is they are talking of supporting a strong Afghanistan, but they don't have their own Afghan policy. Basically, between the lines, what it means is whatever Americans will decide, we will follow the American line. This is what it means actually. Because Pakistan should have an independent Afghan policy, which they don't have. If Pakistan had an Afghan policy, Pakistan would be talking to the Afghan Taliban now. But we are not talking. We may be talking to them under the table, secretly, through the intelligence secret services, but not openly. Taliban are opening an office in Qatar, in Doha. Americans are talking to them. The world is talking to them. But why not invite Taliban to open an office in Islamabad? Turkey is talking to them. Turkey is negotiating with them. When Turkey can talk to them, Qatar can talk to them, world community can talk to them. Why can't Pakistan talk to Afghan Taliban? Because the Americans have said no, that's why the government is too weak. And they're not able to take the American pressure.
So all this news that we are listening, that Pakistan government is talking to Tehrik-e-Taliban and it has offered the peace talks to all the Talibans, all that is not going to work out.
You see,
and the way we are seeing that government and Talibans are going in circles.
You see, this is what we're trying to tell you is, instead of talking to the real
root cause,
real stakeholders in Afghanistan, the Afghan Taliban, Pakistan government is talking to the proxy mercenary army, which is nothing, which is actually controlled by the CIA, which has no decision power on its own. And it is actually happening is the state of Pakistan is surrendering against a terrorist, militant, rebellious, insurgent, radical, heretic group. And this is an insult to Pakistani state, what the government is actually suggesting. And as you said, just a couple of weeks back, or a few days back, a general officer commanding of the Pakistan army was killed by the TTP in a landmine explosion.
And they claim the responsibility
and they have promised to continue waging attacks on the Pakistani state. And we are taking casualties every day. And when there is absolutely no ceasefire from the enemies, and we know that the pressure is upon them, upon the enemy from their handlers, CIA and RAW, not to cease fire, then for the Pakistani state to say that we are going to talk to them is nothing but seen as a surrender. That is not acceptable.
And even those TTP's conditions, the preconditions to come to the table talk is to release to release their terrorist criminals and then to evacuate the army from the areas of Farah.
TTP has seen the weakness of the state, the weakness of the government, and what they are demanding is, as a precondition, is that all their terrorists who are captured by the state must be released, and all the lands that Pakistan army has recovered must be given back to them. Basically, what they are saying is that for the last 10 years, the slog that Pakistan army did, the fight, the sacrifices, the campaigns that we launched to recover land from them should be given back to them. And this is something that the state of Pakistan can never accept. Pakistan army will never accept.
So the step of Pakistani government that they released some Talibans for Afghan Taliban, was that a positive step?
You see, releasing Afghan Taliban is fine because but again, as I said, Pakistan is playing a subservient role here. Pakistan is releasing them because the Americans are telling them. Pakistan is not releasing them because Pakistan is negotiating with Afghan Taliban. This is something that is very important to understand here. Pakistan does not have an Afghan policy yet. It's the American policy which Islamabad is following.
And Islamabad should say no to the US
Islamabad should work on only 2-point agenda. Bringing a broad-based government in Afghanistan consisting of Pashtuns, Tajik, Uzbek and Hazara so that a civil war does not take place, and throwing out every foreign force soldier in Afghanistan. Americans, NATO, Blackwaters, Indians, Nobody should remain in Afghanistan. As long as these foreign forces are present in Afghanistan, war and insurgency, terrorism would continue in Pakistan, and Pakistan would continue to be branded as a dysfunctional failed state.
So you told us the role of Pakistan, how to bring a peaceful regime in Afghanistan. But what's the role of Afghanistan? They're going to have elections next year, and Hamid Karzai would be gone. So how do you see Afghanistan after Karzai is gone, after the elections?
These are all farce elections. They're all facade. There's nothing reality. There's no substance into this. Hamid Karzai was the president of Afghanistan, so-called after the elections, but you know what he's called, Mr. Mayor of Kabul. See, he has no writ beyond Kabul. He has no writ beyond his presidential palace. So these kind of facades Americans always do. They did this in Iraq also. They're doing this in Afghanistan also. They have no mandate. The real power, real authority is with Afghan Taliban, the resistance, the Pashtun resistance.
So you think the Afghan Taliban will be back after the elections?
You see, Afghan Taliban will definitely be back. They are the only party. They have defeated Americans. Americans are negotiating with them. Why are Americans leaving Afghanistan if they were not defeated in Afghanistan? Who has defeated them? It's the Afghan Taliban who have defeated them. So they are definitely going to be back. But this time, there's going to be a little difference. Afghan Taliban have softened up their stance also towards the world. They've learned from their mistakes. They're not going to be as harsh as they were previously. And this time, they are going to accommodate Tajiks, Uzbeks and Hazaras as well, which they did not accommodate last time. So this is something where Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Russia and China must get together to make sure that kind of a peace deal, a broad-based government established in Kabul, that is the only way the entire Central Asia, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Afghanistan and China can be at peace. If there is war in Afghanistan, the entire region will remain in a state of war. This is something the world community must understand.
And can we expect this peace after the general elections in Afghanistan and after the evacuation of NATO?
Afghan elections mean nothing. They're absolutely meaningless completely. And again, the American occupation we have to seek, whether Americans really want to evacuate, and that will again depend on how their economy is facing at home, or are the Americans leaving behind a strong rear guard of Blackwaters and XC and some NATO soldiers and only making a partial withdrawal. That would depend on how Americans react in 2014, and once we see that, we will make only then the next assessment can be made. But Pakistan's interests are clear. Afghanistan must not have any foreign forces in Afghanistan, and Pakistan must use all forces at its disposal, whether it's diplomatic, whether it's political, whether it's negotiations, talking to the Afghans, every force available to Pakistan to make sure that Afghanistan become peaceful, clean of all foreign forces. That's critical for Pakistan's interests.
Thank you very much, Zaid Hamid Saab. Viewers, as you saw the analysis of Zaid Hamid on the terrorism situation in Afghanistan, according to him, US will not evacuate 100% in 2014. There would be a partial evacuation, but it won't be a complete evacuation. And at the same time, a peaceful Afghanistan can guarantee a peaceful Pakistan. So peace in Afghanistan is as important as peace in Pakistan. That's it for today. See you next Sunday. We will be back with more analysis on Middle East, Pakistan and Afghanistan. See you next time.